Teni titsep chom dandi zamo nawa jibshawi chuki namchang ki tangan zila nyumbar chuk so soni. Teni tandi kap tel tandani nga tsu gong to lang ji shet tsar song. Teni ponsum tsokpa nga i goni na lang ji to gong to shet chabre. Teni ma tangbo teni di ti ji tela sangi chom dandi te tangan zin tela nyamjik shi song khyo re. Titsep chom dandi zamo nawa jibshawi chuki namchang ki tangan zila nyumbar chuk so song. Karib shi ni sangi chom dandi tangan zila nyumbar chuk ku kyo re. Di kap ndala zena na teni di ognim jongyur ka te sangi kwa khirib ki nyambo chawa tang chilan ki goni ma mjong gu kyo re. Tip shir na tangwop sangi chom dandi korangni tangan zila yuk ni teni ti goni teni kor tamchib shingi la panda wachi yu shi songa ti chetare. Tip shir na ti tse chom dandi zamo nawa yu songni na tandela zamo tang nawa zaya chingda wa te chik kogo kyo re. Zamo zaya te ta tongpa ki ton te ze kyo re. Chu tamchib ki nil tongpa ki ton te ze kyo re. Yang na teni zang ka sem ki niluk te ze kyo re. Zamo zaya te. Zamo jipa te kari ze na na li hawo chik goni da hachang ka zamo inbi shena tok kawa in re. Li hawo chik tok tok ka yo ma re. Teni inbi shendu nikyang zamo inbi shena na teni zamo se. Nawa jib shawa ze na na te tau zamo te lam nyambar shikpar shepi yurchen ka tangen zan te la zamo nawa ze kyo re. Te yurchen ka hirib te la nawa ze kyo re. Te shena ton la yurchen niga yermet te kyo sonwa te hirib te tang chu gi riyang te niga yermet te kyo sonwa la zamo nawa son re. O te tau teni tangen zan te lam nyam shik shi son re sangi. Te lam nyambar shik son re. Tere. Ta te kyarang tsu samlo tangna sangi di ni kap su nyam shik shi son ze na. Te yin na sangi nyambar mab shik pag ni kap yo rwe samna yo ma re. Sangi tsar ni zon te tuh tak to tangen zin ki nga li yo wa chik tang. Sholam karib shik gu na yang yo wa yo ma re. Yin na yang durshi kam la tu na na tsam la te tabu nom gyur ton na dursha nam la pantok yo re. Chet tu shawi dursha terang dala yo pi khor tham chet yo rawa kongo kumdal la yo pi khor tham chet ka ndan ni pa lu ka nam gyur la ta na o re ta kongo shik tang tang lu bo pa nam gyur ton tang tang kang chi tani samlo tang na kong tangen zilam nyam shik shi song samya te yo re. O tiri chinik dursha nam ki ngo la gu chik kwaan ka tong yo re. O diri re.
Continuing with the text, it says, at that time, the transcendent and accomplished conqueror was resting evenly in the meditative absorption of the enumerations of phenomena known as profound perception. So we, up to this point, then we had the preliminary introduction providing historical context. And it showed that through the 5 excellent circumstances. And then the next sort of action, we could say, in sort of quotes, that takes place for the teaching to occur as it does, is that then the Buddha, the transcendent and accomplished conqueror, Bhagavan, was resting evenly in meditative absorption. And this is because the way in which this teaching, called the Heart Sūtra, the teachings on the perfection of wisdom, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, comes about is through a question and answer that takes place within the presence of the Buddha in his retinue. And so through the power of the Buddha's presence, sitting in meditative equipoise, that sort of that power to effect, what's often translated as blessings, then enabled that to come about, the power to effect of his presence in meditation. And then that meditation is described as being one that is a meditative absorption of the enumerations of phenomena, basically of all phenomena known as profound perception. And so there's two words here. There's the word profound and the word perception. Profound is indicating the ultimate meaning of emptiness. Emptiness that is the natural state, the nature of all phenomena. And that meaning is profound, and being profound is not one that can easily be realized. And so it's called profound. And then the perception, then profound perception. Perception is from the perspective of the perceiver, the one who is experiencing this profundity, who is resting in that state of meditative evenness or equipoise, and directly experiencing that profound nature. And so then it's called the profound perception, the perceiver and perceived. Or we could say the indivisible nature of perceiver and perceived, a profound wisdom. Or we could say then the basic space of all phenomena. Essentially, the Buddha was resting in the direct experience of true nature. Of course, this then causes one to wonder, this may cause one to wonder or to think, well, does that mean that there is a time when the Buddha is not resting in that recognition of true nature and what we call meditative equipoise, and then a time when he is, like a before and after? From the perspective of the Buddha, because as defined as what a Buddha is always resting in the natural state, never wavers from, never is in or out of the direct experience of true nature. However, from the perspective of those who perceive and are relating to a Buddha, such as the Buddha Shakyamuni, it appears that the Buddha sometimes walks around and moves and is engaged in activities, and then sometimes that the Buddha is sitting and meditating. And so from the perspective of beings to be guided by an enlightened being, then we talk about, oh, the Buddha was resting in meditative absorption of the true nature phenomena, or we say, oh, the Buddha was speaking or walking, and so forth. But we shouldn't think then that by speaking in these ways on a relative basis about the way things appear, that means there's ever a time where the Buddha is not resting in the realization of true nature. But there are times where that serves a purpose. For example, that his hands are in the gesture of meditative equipoise, and it looks like the Buddha is sitting in meditation, and so then that's what is being conveyed here. So?
다때레 데니 추기 남노기 당간들라 뉴버 육소 소레 데니 양 디제 샹치 생활 생활 보고 제문 보고 샹에서 함숙정 캐릭 파르투 셴바 자무 쇼바니 말나 마타장 봉하고 때들랑랑 기동한 넘버 따오 소네 다 디제 데니 샹치 생활 샹에서 양 다 상지 그 신랍 그 톱지 샹에서 양 데마 탁도 아 냠식 그 당연전라 육송송 그려래 단대 gem천치기 오래 가르레제는 느니마 럼밥신도 가렉송 그래제나 qalangam 홍와제 때용 그래 qalang지 폰숨 쪽발 nga 담비고니 공도 로차르와 드리 그 폰숨 쪽발 nga 요피 디갑 데라 다 원하 되는디 추드 히럽냥 보디 흥우집 조샤트 송구 그요나 다 간립신이 송그요레스 다 때마 럼밥신도 qalangam 홍용 그요레 든든히 말은 밥신도 낑기고니 다 간립신이 송송즈데 단디나라 캐랑스 따다 종근나라 데니 하리우 샹리즈라 저와 딜렌신이 고 담주고arto 마토코마 상지근고서 송송한다고 지기 요 말에 딥셔나네 데니 상지급 신랍기 톱기 송땅요레 공구샤르 무속 송고가 말에 회나 상지기 구입신기라비 과당 송급신기라비 과당 특급신기라비 과제요레 더니 ndorde 삽지와제 지교레 ndorde sapchiwaze. Ndorde sapchiwi ndorde te sanji ge kware zena red. Te yenna te sanji ge yarni soma zena mare. Te sanji ge kuipshinji la pi kware. Hoena shangchu senhwa dorje nyangpo. Mare dorje gyarpo yinsare. Shangchu senhwa dorje gyarpo jibshawa te sanji ge shikti wotok lab jakne. Shik wotok lab jakpi tob lab tenni ne teni kongum do chasang te jarni sonsong. Tene nar kuipshinji la pi kware. Tebjin tok songupshinji la pi kwayang yore. Te kangre zena ne njambi yang yore wanga zu manzu shiri. Shangchu senhwa njambi yang zayde te kogore. Shangchu senhwa njambi yang te la marki dazayachik yore. Gyarwo marki dazayachik. Ti njopa seroshe pi mdo yore. Ti mdo ti mangla marki pi njopa seroshe pi mdo zek yore.
Okay.
Ti mdo yore. Ti mdo de sanji nguku song mare. Jarni njambi yang kerang ke song hokse. Kongo kwak nangwi stop ji njambi yang ke song song. Mdo chasang shongre. Garte sanji ke shinji lab menane shangchu senhwa dorji gyarwo tang shangchu senhwa njambi yang ni kalayang tertawo song tawya yo mares. Teni yung yore, ta tukip shinji la pi kwa zayate hirib nyangbo tawo yina tukip shinji la pi kwa re tangen zinki tuk tat tangna tat pi go ni parupu teni te song tawka yore. Teni chigla zeki yore.
So, as we continue, then this teaching comes about through the power of the presence of the Buddha resting in meditative equipoise. And that becomes a kind of the condition in which then Avalokiteśvara has a profound insight, and then the following Śariputra is moved to then ask the question, and through this conversation of question and answer, this teaching comes about. So first we have, for example, we have then the preliminary introduction providing the historical context. Then we have this condition of the Buddha in meditative absorption and the conditions that caused the teaching to come about. And so, like, why did that teaching happen? Why did the teaching of the Heart Sūtra occur? And how did it come about? And so that's what this, then the further words are describing the sort of like the catalyst or the conditions. And one was the Buddha resting in meditative equipoise, and the other then was then in his presence, and through that power of the presence, what we call the blessings of that, then Śariputra was moved to ask a question of Avalokiteśvara, who was then able to answer it. And so when we talk about the sutras, we say the words of the Buddha, not all of them were directly spoken by the Buddha. But there are part of the Buddhist canon is a collection of teachings that came about in different ways through the power of the different qualities of the Buddha, and that's what we call the blessings of the Buddha. And so we can say some of the sutras are considered words of the Buddha that came about through the blessings, the power of the presence of its enlightened form. And others are words of the Buddha that came about through the blessings of his enlightened speech. And others are words of the Buddha that came about through enlightened mind. And they're all considered to be of the sutras. For example, there is a sutra in the Buddhist canon, the words of the Buddha, that is called the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis, the 10 levels of realization of a bodhisattva. And that is considered a sutra and the words of the Buddha, but the Buddha did not speak those words. And so the category is considered to be the words of the Buddha that came about through the blessings of his enlightened form. And the sutra itself was spoken by a bodhisattva called Vajra Gyalpo. And so then he, apparently, the Buddha placed his hand on the crown of the head of this bodhisattva, and based upon that, he suddenly was able to and gave this sutra. From beginning to end, he spoke all the words of the sutra. And so we would call that then blessings through the words of the Buddha through the power of the blessings of his form, his physical form. And then an example of the words of the Buddha that come about through the blessings of the enlightened speech would be, for example, like the Bodhisattva Manjushri, very specifically not the deity, but the Bodhisattva Manjushri. And he then gave a teaching to the king Ajatasattu, Ajatasattu. And this is called the sutra that dispels regret. Again, it wasn't literally spoken by the mouth of the Buddha. Manjushri gave that teaching at the behest of the Buddha. And so the Buddha said to him, give this teaching, or, and directed him to teach. And then when he spoke, that's the sutra that came. The sutra that dispels that dispels regrets. And so then that, again, was due to then the Buddha's speech. So we would call that the words of the Buddha through the blessings of the Buddha's speech. And then there's this. We have that sutra by Vajragyalpa that came about in that way. We have the sutra by Manjushri, the Bodhisattva Manjushri came about this way. And then this one is one that is considered the words of the Buddha through the power of the presence of his enlightened mind. And so he was resting in that meditative equipoise of that profound nature, and his mind sort of focused its intent. And through the power of the presence of that, then the teaching came about right there in his presence, as we'll see. Maso?
대리, 대니 다 대니라고 그래. 대니 계란수 가수 삼로다나 뜻간립신이 종회요 앞사면다고 요래 옛날에 길긴 때문에 망보 촉나네. 무부 누바제때 삼기 맥혀파래. 딥셔나 용구요래. 상기제때 방샤 차창방 똑샤 탐치 똑자리 강석치글라 제케요래. 상기 삼기 맥혀파 망보 요촉래. 아 대니 가초영 차차마 대니 대상기 탐칸내레지나 탐체 상기 탑거래 상 야롱래. 가초 있나 김성 강래제나 가초라 대병셔비 냥보요래 가초 열라. 딥셔나는 가초 차상 상기 탑야가 상기 롱야래. 가르테 상기 송나 강석직 상기 송나 회나 소수 개월라 소수 개우 누바직 요래. 회나 소수 개월 즉 파르카니 콜라 제와직 딱해요 나양 디 누바 계랑라 랩그래. 회나 nd니 탁랑보요 나양 고 하고나 고 가그래. 회나 카르쇼니 카브르끄능라 콜라더니 지금 nga chola ga khyo zayanda wo chi lap jang nga cho hali patin sem nang la nu thep do bi yore thana nam gyur chi ngak la yang nu patin ri yore yang na nam gyur kerang ke mik rik sona hwena mujamba pha ta na yang te nam gyur la teni rang lu bo sem kana la chora dam na cho ma yong gu do ga de yong gu du ku gem sang ga re na te tem de ngu bu nu bari 바로 부강석 그 누박이 됐다고 가서 인결한 거예요. 대비전 동 아픈 잠보랑 그 사람 독독인데 양네 무부 누밥 삼기만 잡비 고니 남카 동반인 것도 누구래. 쇼칭니 삼로다나 얌잘 거래. 대남진디 썩한 낙찰 강 있나요? 라나 소소라 누바다 훅직요래. 왜나 형니가 냠도 깨게요나 고니가 디지 탁녀온다고 했나? 형직 그 누바가 형직 그 란게와도 그래 제기노가 산익 바남기 때제기오래. 고니 투기오 마다 짜와 투고 말 야카 투고 말 로마 투고 막 깎게 투고 말해. 때 옛날에 누바제야티 그런 거 톱그 드립신이 온 거요래. 왜나 아주 만칭 동나양 때래 펠 총총직 잡지나 디 누바 간에다오 쳔보도. 다동 샘급 삼로 땅땅 잠바직 삼로 땅땅 찍시나 누바 대비신 때요래 영 삼로 땅땅 잠바치라 게르나양 누바 때타보요래 왜나 게랑수 삼로 땅땅 아주 얼만 짜와니니 멍칸치라 만 레제니 쫓나양 뭐뭐보 탓도고 누가 nali tano kama boyor wa te kyang so
Right.
lap tang ching do wa
Yeah.
nga te yam sar ko to yek po du sam ka to me ti khwe te so kerang chu di sem ke nyam nen tang jar ni ko alen gu ko re nang bi jong tang te je na te korang man te korang ko ngola nguni yo mare ka ke kor man mare yin na yang tani korang nali tar so gemsen kar ne sem ku nu bare te sem ku nu bare te nam jen ngu bo kare yin na yang nga chu ngu bu chu ni ze te la tani ku nu ba chen bo yo re ti chen na 초 소수 개워 인비니 갑나야 누바 만다바요. 데니 영 샹치 생활 결송이 갑나 누바 만다바 착로고요래. 데니 상기 톱소나 다 톨리 누후 체후데레. 가르 파지티브 그 누후 체후데 상기라요. 가르지나 똑반 다르신소. 디입셔나 된 계랑 준더다 없이는데 빼 릴하보지 그래 상기람 쳤나? 드르샤양 코랑 노 땅담바지 인구고래. 다노 롱와지. 덴디 그때니 강사 차퍼와지 인구고요래. 대란들이시니 구입신기라박 송구신기라박 투깁신기라박 시나 신기랍 토크요레스. 어디디시니 때니 ngubu 누바당 공동이 라베나 템르제야디 제야데 상로 당고요래. 어디디레스.
So, whenever we consider anything, like taking into consideration these teachings, like how did they come about? They come about when the gathering of all causes and conditions are present, when the interdependence is there.
Yeah, it's okay.
When the interdependence is there.
간접신이 들이 송토크 요압 삼나 데려와 말자.
Right. And so then we're looking at then the interdependence for these specific teachings. The kind of principal one is the Buddha himself, and what a Buddha is: someone who has eliminated all that we wish to be free from, and who has fully realized all that can be realized by definition. And then anyone could become a Buddha. Anyone can be a Buddha because we are all Buddhable in that we have Buddha nature, which that means the nature of our mind is already that of a Buddha. And so we have the potential to realize it. And anyone who does is called a Buddha. And when we have realized it fully, then we have the power to effect of what all that constitutes being a Buddha. Everything has the power to effect. So, for example, as ordinary beings, we have a power to effect. Like if we give love to others, if in our mind we love others, they can be affected by that. Like if someone calls you on the phone from a whole other part of the earth and they say, I love you, I care about you, then that's the power to effect of their speech. Or if someone looks at us in a specific way, whatever the expression is, it has the power to affect us, whether positively or negatively. That's what we call dependent origination or interdependence, the power to affect, which is that one thing in dependence upon that, the power to affect that has, the potential or capacity that has affects something else and something changes. And when we consider that in so many ways to kind of our ordinary perception, it is inconceivable, like all the sort of power to affect and so forth of like the planet Earth, all the interdependence that takes and what it can do and so forth. It's unbelievable. And every single thing on Earth has a power to affect. The forests, the mountains, each and every plant has its own power to effect. And that power to effect is such that it doesn't always appear to be that there's direct contact either. So you could have like two trees growing together, and then scientifically it can be observed that one tree is affecting the other, and yet their roots are not touching, their trunks are not touching, their branches are not touching, but there is a power to effect. There is a set of causes and conditions affecting the other, and that's its power to effect. Like, for example, if we have medicine and we take a pill and it cures us from a disease, that one round pill has that power to affect. Every single thing in the universe has the power to affect another and cause change in another that's, that corresponds to that thing. If we look at the power to affect of our mind, just take for example a situation like where we have an illness and we're given a placebo, a round pill made of sugar, and we think it's medicine, but it's actually not. And yet, what is the percentage of people who are cured from illnesses based on a placebo? It's quite high, Rinpoche said. I was very surprised when I heard that. And that's because of the power of the mind. The pill itself that isn't medicine is doing nothing. But the power of our mind to be cured from that belief and that experience is extraordinary. Some people have, been cured of diseases using placebos. And that's the power to affect of the mind itself. And so every single thing on earth has its own power to affect that corresponds to what it is in its circumstances. And so as ordinary beings, we have a certain capacity or a power to affect others. I remember in the Buddhist texts, like food, we call one thing, we say the substance or the food of meditative absorption. But there doesn't actually mean there's a food or an actual physical substance, but that meditative absorption itself can sustain a body at a certain level, and that it is feeding the body.
Okay.
And then we have the substance of thought. They call it the substance of thought. Okay.
Yes. So
sometimes when people think there is food, they can actually be sustained on that. Actually, there isn't, but they think of it. It's called the substance of mental thought. And so we think, that there is food in this container, even when there's not. And so that power of thought that thinks there is food can actually sometimes cause someone to be able to survive for a certain number of days. If they know that there's no food there, and then they no longer have the thought there's food, then they die of starvation. So when we talk about substances, we have like potential. The third is the actual food. So these are called the three kinds of food. And the third is the actual food that we eat, the material food that we typically eat.
Yum. So you like that one, food. You like most the third one, yeah? I wish you tried the first one.
So each and everything in the universe, its nature is such that it has a power to effect. And as ordinary beings, we have we often call that capacity. On the case of the Buddha or Bodhisattvas, then they have their capacity, their power to affect. And then in the case of the Buddha, then they have their power to affect. That's what we call blessings. That power to affect, which is greatly magnified because of the levels of realization and qualities that they have, that then enable them to affect others in ways that may seem extraordinary, that are not ordinary, that they can guide beings in these different ways. But also, the interdependence has to come together. So the students themselves that can be guided in these different kinds of ways, then they have to also have their own qualifications and so forth. So then the Buddha has to have their power to affect, what we call the blessings of the power of the Buddha, right? That has, what that Buddha is. So that's one condition, one interdependence also. And then the disciples that can be guided by that, they have to have their interdependence. What's the causes and conditions that enable them to be moved by that, to be affected by that. And so when we begin to understand interdependence or dependent origination in a greater way and such, then we can understand the power to effect or we could say the blessings of enlightened body, speech, and mind, and how then the interdependence of these circumstances coming together as such is the way in which these different teachings occur.
Teni so teni chini ngi terang kong de kerang tola yuin nga tsu tawar ten chang ren jong jiba te hirb zamu goni teni kunzob ku demba tang ton da bib demba tham chi ki ni luk tu tsurijin de tu ba tang sam ba tang gombab shi ni yagbo chi hirb de gomper de tang thap na nga tsu sem la di top ki teni rong ge nyamnen yin na zabru ro wa tang namgyun yin na tu tak to teni gyachero chero tang zabru ro ko yore 제tam기 냠는 장로 로와당 예그로 로위 까블라 프랑샤 탐체테 프랑와테는 릴하로 로코레 코나 컨트롤직 프랑고나야 릴하고 want 게르토비아당 데니 가 코나 샹치 셈직 깨고나 냥제 깨고나 게위 쇼강 잠보 가리 깨고 요나야 차창도 릴하고 신이 셈나니 용톱고 요레 가레지나 랑그 셈나라 테타우 ngubu niluk tokpi ni hirp zamochi gilla yang ke yore ter ke wala tusum gomsum gu yore o teni chini teni rona de rang ge nga zo kerang zo derang di nang la nyenkan pat chewa de nang ba yin kre teni yinna teni nga zo sangji chu dang genden sam kumchuk sam la tapa yo patang tangwi tapa dopi tapa 입집이 답아. 다 디스자와테 강라 투고레제나 히럽 라락리오레. 히럽 기고니 줌슨 히피 톡니 쿄라 데니 당와 당도 바당 이집이 답아지 용구요. 갈레 갈렙시니 계랑 그 영니 니르고 하고니 줌슨 히니 디망랑아투 히니 답아 제키오레. 마히 비답아 제지 모비 답아 제지 정 요레. 다가직 이치바 대당 겸슨 희비고니 이치바 니요와 디브시나 나와 상지비 대빠제테 겸슨 희비토니 이치바 용고요레 대인나 가렙시니 캡순로나 판톡 요레제나 대랑데라 지와 나오신데 니 캐랑솔라 주바 나오제 땡장 렌종제테 상지 추당 겐든 삼라 누바요레 디 톱기 회나 람냠스 렌나 누바요바 마쟇 kumchuk sum ki nuba derang la top kyo pa mazat nga chu tsuk mo khwena nat nali tharwi che to sora ta pa ta pshawa lamdu che to kumchuk sum la sora ta pa la so pa cha chama te ngubu chuni ki goni yong ge yor kumchuk sum demba chi yin charni zorte divshen lap te malho war yor o divshen na tani hirib te tapi jabla hirap yogo khiore hirap yona ngachu tapateng tambo dukre tambo chertan dukre hirap menana tapateng kansamchila kenchi knyam chokre odindi res
So Rinpoche said, as we began with today in talking about the sort of summary of the whole Buddhist path and tradition, the view is of dependent origination, and that is the wisdom that realizes relative and ultimate nature of reality. And that wisdom comes about through hearing, contemplating, and meditating on teachings. That's how the wisdom progresses and how it grows. And then as much wisdom as is growing, then our practice is becoming more and more profound and more powerful, more and more impactful and transformative. As strong as our practice is, then that much more powerful it is in overcoming our mental afflictions. So that it gets easier and easier to eliminate, for example, the disturbing emotions, for what we want to be free from. For example, it gets easier to eliminate anger when it rises in our mind stream. And then the qualities that we're cultivating also come to us more and more naturally, those of loving kindness, of compassion, of what we call bodhicitta. It becomes easier and easier. Why? Because the profound wisdom that realizes the true nature of phenomena is growing in our mind stream. And as that expands, then the practice becomes more impactful. It has a greater power to affect, a greater power and influence in our minds. And so then, and how do we cultivate wisdom? Through the threefold process of hearing teachings, contemplating them, and then meditating upon them. And so Rinpoche said, I think that the majority of you who are listening to these teachings today are already, to some extent or more, Buddhist practitioners, and thereby have some confidence, some faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We talk about the three kinds of faith: clear faith, yearning faith, and the faith of confidence, confident faith. And faith is born of wisdom, of knowledge. Wisdom being understanding the reason for something. And so the more that we understand the reason for something, how it is what it is, and what its power to affect is, the more that we can have these kinds of faith: clear faith, yearning faith, confident faith. And slowly faith grows as our wisdom grows. As we see more and more, our mind aligns with seeing the way things are and their actual nature. So there are two different kinds of faith. One is faith based on wisdom, one that knows the reasoning or logic behind something, that understands or knows something to be the case. And therefore we have faith in it, we trust it. Or there's blind faith, which means we just believe in something, but we don't have the background of the knowledge of understanding why that's the case and of establishing or proving that to be the case. So in the Buddhist tradition, the focus is on knowledge-based faith, which means we understand the reason for something, we've determined it as such, we have an insight or knowledge about it to know it to be the truth, and then we trust that, and that's what we call faith. And then further, for example, when we look at like going for a refuge, we talk about the benefits of refuge, and this ties into the power to affect and what we've been talking about, interdependence, because then the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the three jewels, each of these has a power to effect. And so obviously the main sort of power to effect is when we practice the path in relation to those, but also they themselves have their own power to effect, which is why we can, for example, say prayers and do practices that then we can overcome illnesses, and that we pray for these things, or we pray for success in our endeavors and so forth, because everything has a power to effect. And if it truly is a Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, then it has that power to effect. And when we rely on that, even through those approaches, we are affected by that, because of their infallible power to effect. And so then as we and so when we look at faith, primarily in this tradition, it's the faith that comes through knowledge, or we could say wisdom. If we have faith without knowledge that has no backing, nothing to back it up, then eventually some condition can arise and then we lose our faith because we don't know it to be true in the first place. Also.
Otere tengi karibshini labien zena kerang tsundela sangiki deni tangen zenki shingi la pazenanda tukki shingi lapi ndote hirb nyangpo chakayore tip shinlap karibshinim kandibshinim jongtang karere zena dirishinim jongre zen ngubu nupap samki makyapare tela tenip jongayore zeningi kerang tso te tamreni yuyin tere teni ta tigni kap telap shangchu 생화 첨보 다 박바 살락니바 박바제나 소수께우 살락 맹큰 소수께우 추 nga초 남진 그 박바제야 때랍 샹첩 생화제야 때 초라 nga초 남진 그 당전 첨보 당나 덕진전 당 당전 첨보 당 nga르게 당 탁독 당 유모 발라속 바탐 nga초 남진 요말 좋은 그 차탐체 요말 ngato namjin ke tendi ke monjur watang ragpa tang tendi menken ke tokba gilla dan tsar yong kan namla ne karze ke orjina phakpa ze ki ore timang lap shang chu sengwa chembo lap ki ore otere teni ndela san lap shang ne zi wang shuk se tep shang chu sengwa takching ke shang chu sengwa sam ki me kya bandi sangi ke tanda hirb nyang bu khor ta konchok som nyam du so ang ni na 상기 무수 죽래 되니 추데 히럽냥 부추 요래 겐던데 탁신 당 탁만 그 겐은 니간도가 문이 겐은 마테 손도가 어 건축섬 냠 누요비 깝라 디나라 샹첩 생화 삼기메게 첨척만 보요린 콜 디나니 샤니르직 코랑다 되니 데 샤니르직라 다 상기 급신랍 투기 샤니르직라 떼띠오래 jut신기람는덕 송토야 그 누반도 나오 때니 상지 그때 또블라 때니 숑고요 오나 샤니 즈그제나 가르제 거레제나는 샤니 즈그제테 공금산 토모 많이 빠지 그래 때라 코르당 니오레 아 녀르지 챤제 치고레 챤 때라 코르당 니오레 녀르지 챤제다 추니기 챤제 니오레 녀르지의 그 챤제나 오래 때니 녀르지의 그 챤티 샘친 탐실라 뚜딱도 녀르지의 그 즈기오 다 샴당 녀르지 요비 차트 딱바 샹주 생화당 상기 탐식기 너니 후엔죽사 따오데 응원니 따와도 녀르지 첨보 등담바데 샹리스 그래 아 믹서로 와지기 오래고 더니 녀르지 챤제 오래 추니기 챤제나 히럽라고 그거래 영어 딱비 흔일룩 똑비 히럽디 강락즈 키오레즈나 흔일룩 추기랑라 딱도 즈크요레 텔라 냠식 셰키요레 딥샤나 텔라 샤니 즈제 니코나 디그레 샤니 즈 왕숙 장스 다 콘토니 히럽기 파르토 심바자모 쇼바닐라 넘버 따장스 콘토 샤피 히럽기 파르토 심바 따와자모지 요아 오 테타 우테니 당한진기 응랑라 템냠버 샥송 송레 공게양 테타 우 냠식 테는 폼보 nga 탐식 그 추니디양 때리 제레 다 옥님 좀 그래 폼보 nga데 룩말 룩기 폼보 소리 폼보 누히당 누셰당 남히기 폼보제 폼보 nga가나 땅아주 추 탐식 랍 강망치 업더도 그래 누치 그추 탐식 폼보이 난더도 그래 어 데이터부터니 폼보가 데이터랑랑 경험하다 버지 따오 소나 더니 추 탐식기 추니 람냠식 시송지 비돈 따때리 너르두나 다 폼보가 옥님 숑 그래 가서 단다 랍고고만 누기봐 다 공금 냠식 시송송래 데이터
And so the reason why I'm speaking about this is because as we look, then we're speaking about this sutra, the Heart Sūtra, as being one that came about through the blessings of the enlightened intent of the Buddha, and explaining what that means. That everything in the universe has a power to affect, and that is often that the interdependence of how that power to effect comes is often inconceivable to us, but it does have that power to effect whether we know what that interdependence is or not. And so then at this time, through the power, the blessings of the Buddha's presence, the blessings of the Buddha resting in meditative equipoise, then this teaching came about in this and continues to unfold in this way. So it says, while the Buddha was resting in that meditation, also at that time, noble Avalokiteśvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looked comprehensively at the experience of the profound perfection of sublime wisdom and saw that in all their variety, the five mind-body aggregates are empty by nature. So as we continue reading in the text that you have, then first it says noble, and that is, in Sanskrit, the term is Arya, and it means then not an ordinary being, but someone who has reached then the high levels of realization. In fact, the word itself kind of means to have like jumped above or gone above something. And so they're elevated would be another translation of Arya. And we commonly, simple, less literal translation is noble, but it means someone who has gone beyond, has kind of gone above, is elevated above ordinary mind. Like they are no longer stuck in the same ways as we are in the belief and construct of the grasping to a self in pride, jealousy, disturbing emotions, and so forth. They're no longer an ordinary being under the power of disturbing emotions. They're elevated. They have gone above that. They're at the levels of realization, so they're an Arya or noble being. And so that's what that term refers to. It's indicating that Avalokiteśvara is not an ordinary being. Through the power of his qualities, he's gone the level above an ordinary being due to the power of the qualities and realization that he has. And so then here, Avalokiteśvara is one of the bodhisattvas of the Mahāyāna tradition. And in fact, just as a side note here, we can see that all the three jewels are present because there's the presence of the Buddha, so a Buddha, and then we have the noble Sangha, which is of the both of the Hinayana and Mahāyāna, the bodhisattvas and fully ordained practitioners. The Sangha is there, Buddha, Dharma, and the Dharma, which is the Heart Sūtra. So the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are all three here in this very profound way. And then through the power of the blessings, the presence of the Buddha's enlightened intent, Avalokiteśvara, as one amongst the Sangha, was able to speak. And then when we look at Avalokiteśvara, the name also has a meaning. The Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara Chenrezik, which doesn't translate well into English, so we rarely do it. It's something like looking with all eyes, but it has a specific meaning. And so then one way of looking at the meaning, it's a description of Avalokiteśvara's qualities, is the eyes of compassion. And another way of interpreting the name is the one with the eyes of dharmata, of true nature. So on the one hand, Avalokiteśvara is called eyes of compassion because as a bodhisattva, he sort of exemplifies as the very epitome of great compassion, always gazing on all beings with immeasurable loving kindness and compassion. And Avalokiteśvara stands out as an exemplar amongst bodhisattvas for his compassionate nature and is often referred to as the bodhisattva of compassion. And so then if we interpret Avalokiteśvara's name as the eyes of compassion, that would be that meaning. But we can also interpret the name as the eyes of dharmata, of true nature, because Avalokiteśvara has seen the natural state, the authentic and true nature of all phenomena, and is constantly seeing that basic space of phenomena and resting in the meditative equipoise of that. And that interpretation,
looking with
we could
the
say,
eyes.
the name Avalokiteśvara would be like looking with eyes. You could see why we don't usually leave it in English. But the eyes can have two meanings. One is compassionate and one with wisdom. So in this context, we can look at it more kind of emphasized on the wisdom aspect because Avalokiteśvara looked comprehensively at the experience of the profound perfection of sublime wisdom and saw in all their variety the five mind-body aggregates are empty by nature. And so the five mind-body aggregates is one way in which we can speak of the all phenomena. All composite phenomena can be subsumed within this category of these five mind-body aggregates, which are called forms, sensations, perceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness. And we'll go through them in greater detail. And at the end, I'll mention that there's a guide that we've added to your resources. At the end of the teaching, I'll talk about that. And so these five mind-body aggregates are a way of speaking about the entire composite universe of phenomena. And so essentially by seeing that they're empty by nature then and resting in that meditative absorption, we're saying that Avalokiteśvara was seeing the true nature of all phenomena. And it's just a very sort of scholastic way to say it. with a very specific reason. And so Rinpoche said, don't worry, we'll get into what these 5 mind-body aggregates are, but essentially it's saying all phenomena. Also.
Teni sangi kimtu tsedon damba kari wu shangju sangwa sangwa chemo pagwap shani zogam shulan de kachi miso o soni teni sangi kimtu zayate kondu shapa namjin de sangi kushin lap tob lap teni ta trawa tram khanta tin khor tini mampo yore tinani sutra kayore zenane tsedon damba kari wu zayate takayore zere ta kari wu nguni shana tani 타민기 강석 남줄 때래 콘더니 남바테 타민기 강석 남바탄도 나가요래 옛나야 더니 하리부자테 히럽금 촉도 결바래 상직을 홈마 차창가 나니 히럽김 촉도 결와 하리부다 점트리김 촉도 결바 모언가르기부제 니요래 공거 딱바래 회나 계랑주디 탕가테 중얼한 참참 따다 상직이 당연라 자와니야 요바테 때래 더니 하리부다 모언가르기부 니까래 공구슬랄 홈마니 야랑도가 데니 때리 찍득 히럽금 촉도 결과래 찍득 점출금 촉도 결과래 득 히럽금 촉도 결과 가리부래 콩니가 빼 캠사원라고 요래 님 가리나 가리부제때 디 가리제때 아마그마래 아미마라 가레 가라보 기바제송 가리 가리깔라 가리깔라 Hari, yeah.
Do you know what it is?
Haratoti.
Śariputra.
Yeah, Haratoti in Saresangwado.
That's
Haratoti is a Amakamang Harachik Zekiore. Teni Ami Manta pull up the Ti Pugula and Haripu Zekiore. The son of Shari. Teni Mongar Kiboyan Koranga Amak Taxo. Mongar Zade Koranga Amare. Teni Ti Pudela, Teni Young Harry Mongar Kibu Labna, Teni Young Koranga Mangachson Dorna. Or Dendipshini, Teni Koniga Mante or a Ti Harry will change, Ti Shanch Shani Zealand the Ketchir, Miso, Sonre. Or did he?
Then, through the power of the Buddha, which now we've already explained, when talking about what blessings are, that power to effect and so forth, through the power of the Buddha, then the worthy Śariputra asked noble Avalokiteśvara a question. And so then here amongst a great retinue, then specifically Śariputra was moved to ask a question. And so Śariputra then was one of the Hinayana Sangha, a prominent figure, but particularly was known for his kind of great realization of wisdom. And so he exemplified the realization of wisdom. And so amongst this particular Sangha, then the Buddha had 2 students, and one was said to be foremost in the Prajna teachings on wisdom, and that was Śariputra. And the other was said to be knowledgeable in the wisdom teachings, which was so knowledgeable. The most knowledgeable was considered to be Śariputra. He was extremely erudite and had great insight of relative and ultimate reality, and was able to ascertain and understand things extremely quickly.
He's a very smart student. Even before he graduated, he was already very famous.
And then the one who is said to be a master of miracles was Moggallana. And so these 2, oftentimes you'll see a picture of the Buddha on a tanka, and you'll have to his right and left are 1 monk on either, standing on either side of the Buddha, and that is these 2 students, Śariputra, who was foremost in knowledge, and then Moggallana, who was foremost in being able to perform miracles. And so Rinpoche said, and both these guys have pretty funny names. Actually, when we look at like the meaning of their names, like Sharipu literally means child or son of Shari. And so his mother's name was Sharatoti.
Śariputra.
Sharatoti. And and then they added another syllable in the original languages of Sanskrit and Tibetan, and it makes it like son of Shara. And then Moggallana also was named after his mother, and it also meant like mother, son of Moggall or something along those lines. And so then both of these were outstanding and kind of foremost students amongst the Buddha's retinue. And so at this point, then Śariputra specifically is moved to ask a question of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara. Lassa?
Tereteni rikyo mo kanglala kiraki parto shema zamu shoba shaparando pandi chertal haparcha teke chimi patangze ni taku trawa kariti songze na shani z nyamshik shi do yor watangen zla ti kapla teni Śariputra ka trawa tire rikyo mo kanglala shipate ta ni kap ko dorsha ka wangdo samlo tana rikyo mo se chapar kanyang yo mare rikyo tang wo mo kang inayang 히르기 파르토 셴바 육초호요래 옛나양 더니 가르테 때다고 오당보모 쓰인나 히르기 파르토 셴바 육초비 강사때 코랑 리당 손노 믹서와치 인송래 gemsan 강레제나는 코랑 리당 손음 역보 맹칸치 옛나네 회나 깨와 나마나마 탐체그니 감나 구 개와 썩니 이더니 코랑 그 깃티지면 용칸 그 역보직 만나네 wotangomo seyin kyana dikhir ki parto shembaze te ha lipi zammo imbi gimsan ki tela techum zamyang zagma re songore wana nga chu khirib ki parto shembala techum zamyang za songnayo chikthana khirib ki parto shemba yang takpa tok songna tap sam ki ma khyapare yete mannayo o chikthana niri dawo yinsare samsam chik gowarak songnayo techum zamzu songnayo ne 마음바나 티 사분 샘랍 역요레 티 톱기 마음바다 스트파 슈르셴 송니 코르위 싸와 마릭파 싸와니니 판테피 히럽길라 깨 용그레제 히럽자모 마음바 깨니 태좀 맷니 따와양 딱파 똥로 그레제 디입셔나나 너타우 히럽기 파르토 셴바 똥바니 그 코르라 스토와 용칸땅 똥바니 그 코라 얼가와 용칸테 소이나 rik mixer wa sonum chanki tani rik ki wotang womo zeta tani la tsagu ko yore rik tang dam bi wotang womo zeki yore de rik ki wom womo zete rik tang dam ba ze korang rik manda ba da wo yore the different family rik ki womo kang la la ze shir tang ge tani wotang womo ze kang la kyapre yo mare den den de sanji kha te pi ne ke lo ni tong lak ngong ko lo ni tong ta ta par che tukja yar mar ke kap ko ta kap ko te lorgyure de gemsende te tabu kapla rikiwam rikyomozen shirtang ge jagar ke nalar hali biring thoman yore poda mog kyapre yore teni yang rikorang yang mandawa ma pog thoman pe chembo yore yenna yang ten nabi lugla tsawani ni changji ke me prabzu jore yo mare songore nabi chu de su nyamslen kan yenna teni telana chulu kyapre yo mare teni 포모기 캬프레요 말에 강슝기 캬프레요 말에 teni ndorna rana soso strowa yongkan chigena nang wilam nan juk cho songore tadire ta derang di ni kap soyang kare la korezena wotang womo seyna teni rikki wotang womo tam 그 히럽기 파르토 셴바 냠는 시eg고나 텔라 투바당 삼바당 곰비고니 삽고 그요나 가리치고 그래제 tawatire konso teni muba yongkan tang teni chowa yongkan chik yodna tela tapa tang teni yongkan yinna kare che gore zekyore teni ngi tata yuyina tela tapa yongkan tang muba yongkan tang shobab shapar ndopa ti zena konso teni girik kibu tang womo teni ge ndopa tang teni tela chowa yongkan girik yodna kare che gore zeni ta teni songrok chi songre chiwatire.
So the question that Śariputra asked or posed to Avalokiteśvara as Avalokiteśvara was resting also in this profound insight, this meditative equipoise of insight, was how should any son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? And so then this question, it says, any son or daughter of noble family. So what that means, of noble family, then means then someone who previously had accumulated, like in previous lifetimes and so forth, the merit and so forth, to have then an interest in realizing the ultimate nature, whether they be male or female. Whether, and so then the child of spiritual good fortune is any ordinary being that, and as ordinary beings, we also all have kind of different capacities of what they call in Tibetan, it's called like families. And it's just like it depends on our interests, our capacities, what inspires us, and so forth. And so here specifically, then when it says a child of spiritual good fortune, then it means someone who like wonders about and wants to know about these things. There are some people who never even have a thought about it, who never even have a doubt about the way things are, who, in the sense of like, of this more profound nature. And so then someone who has kind of like a doubt about the way things appear, wonders about what could the actual nature be, and wish to pursue that. Even just beginning to wonder about the nature of reality, just having that wondering about it, can be like a seed that if planted can uproot through the cultivation then of profound wisdom or insight into the nature of reality, can eventuate in uprooting the sources of samsara in entirety. So even just the doubt about the nature of things is like a seed that can lead to awakening. And so here, child of spiritual good fortune means someone who has an interest in pursuing that, who's enthusiastic, who wants it, who's curious. And that comes from merit, having previously created sort of spiritual good fortune and so forth. So anyone in this family, and it means anyone, it says son or daughter, any child of spiritual good fortune, anyone. This was and it also has a kind of a greater meaning and context, because the Buddha Shakyamuni was born into a society over 2,600 years ago in India that was extremely classist. The classes were very strong. The differences between male and female roles were very strong, and so forth. And he was radical in that Buddhism was for anyone who wanted it, and there was no difference between men or women, between class, between what religion they may have previously followed or follow. And it was merely then everyone was, it was equally available to everyone without any of those kinds of differentiations. And so essentially, whoever had enthusiasm for it could have it. Equal opportunity. And so that's why it says, any son or daughter, child of noble family, then means someone who is inspired to realize wisdom that will take us to the other side, the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. And who wants to hear teachings on that, to explore that, to contemplate that, to meditate upon it. Whoever wants it, whoever is inspired by it, has faith in that, has interest in that, wants to realize that, is a child of spiritual good fortune. So whoever is interested, then what should they do? And that's what this question is saying. What should they do? How should they realize it? Also?
Look like, I don't know, that time was Indian cultures. What look like it, we don't know. But if these days, like America way, look like we just imagined these histories, then maybe, Śariputra did meditate like this, and then he just, and then, no, Shanrizi,
Avalokiteśvara.
Avalokiteśvara, not exactly, but and then Śariputra, and that's many people. There's so many students. I look like that, and then he asked to Shari Zig to these teachings, and then Shari Zig saying like, well, like in this culture, I don't know that time what happened, but look like it's similar like that. Uh-huh. I can see a little bit their expressions. Uh-huh. Take a Jimmy Patan. Shanchu, Senhua, Chimbo, Power Shan is one should tell them. Harando Dulan, take a Jimmy so Harato di Telapdova.
No.
Harato di.
Orisha to the
The Gipate.
bucket only. Ore.
Power Shan is one should tell them Harando Dula. Nerka Jimmy so Rikiwam Rikumo Kala like. Hirki part Shimazam Shivandoba in the number tower Sharte Zeni. Takhirki part of Shimbal La Chester and Jupi Surta. Shan is a Shaki or Rekariwola. Lanta Pini Kamna. Dedishini Lantabre, Detawu, Karatan Dambiriki Wotorikiomo Kanlala, Hiraki part of Shemba Zamu Shabandopandi, Hiraki part of Shemba Mubu Niluk, Yantak Patsik, Stok Parandopi, Telan, Trova Yunkanta, Tela Muba Yunkanka, Namlane, Konsu, Dedichini Labgo Grace, Konsu, Nadishini, Tubatan, Sambatan. Teni gombi goni tower shego kres and that number tower shates. Pong out at Karan Kitona Tawaji's Tao, song in a Pombo now at Kang, Tandi Olayore, Zuki Pombo, Sori Pombo, Duhiki Pombo, Dushiki Pombo, Namhiki Pombo, Zeni Pombo Nayore. Tak Zuki Pombo, but or the Tere, Zuki Pombo, Tip Pombore. Ramjingi Tombayan Tawaji's Tao song. That is teni Kare Lapkiores and an Pong out at Ramjingi Tombayan Tawajis Tao sona. The Ramjingi Zenane, Yeni Koranga, Niluk der Tarto, Koranga Chunit der Tau Yimbate, Yeni Mapchupa Yimbandawachik, Tonit, Kotu Niluk der Tonite, Tombare, Tir Niluk the Hakogukundu, Sore. Tatimala Tsubdu Yana to Yurtan Yurchin, when Namhi, when a Zoma Yurtan and Zamba Sem Nikatina, Pomborngati and Subdunan di Tapkare. Natsu Zoma Yurzen, Yuryotocho Tamchetan, Namkichik Yuryotocho Tamchetan, then Yurching Hipate or Teta Tamchete, Di Ramjin, De Ramjin Kitoma, Di Mubo Tamchet, Don Tambala, Ramjin Kitonite, Koto. Gunzop the Natsu Rikiore, Natsum Tonkiore, the Natsu Sozuke Namki Mikta Navata Nata Chetan, Luton Yillas of Yurto, Zugdatero Rakshaman Bochi Nankiore. Yenayan, Don Tambala, Ramjin Kitani, Matapir Nilukchigiore. When Natsu Zuglab Samlotana, Natsu Tati Zungarana Sosola Zugiore. Kampayore, Lakpayore, Teni Natsu Samlotana, Di Kampatan Lakpandri Dawachi Samlotan to Kayore, De la Pakpayore, Kayore, Rupayore, Teni Rubaganala, Teni Kanyore, O Takyore, Teni Nantal Mampo Yore, organs Yore, Teto Natsu Zupot and the Dawayan Samlotan to Gore. There were Yenayang, Tengatsu, Sosukyo Namking Ola Nansote, Natsu Zinsote. Natsu Mik Hipatan, Navi Hipala Sopi, Teni Yurland Dicurcures. Yenayang, then in the Ramjin, Don Tambalana, the Ramjin Kimatrapat, and the Nilukte, de la Nilukchiores, and Natsu Mamton Vichachik. Tarta Ninikande, Don Tambalan de Natsu Tarta Tamar Matak keeping Olam Tonto Mapir Nilukchiore, de la. The Hachang Zamores, Tirnilukte, Semlayan Tirnilgore, your Tamchella Tirnilukte, Tamchella Macha Payomar Tirnilukte. When Nangatsu Honey Dawochigina, Kawani Zana Marmorwa, Cookie Dawochikani Zana Marmorwa, Koran Telati Kapdugore, 쿠키 요또 쪽 탐쳤당 하니 요또 쪽 탐쳤랑 말무 잡어. 포에테 나우진 나츠디 유르당 유르진 탐쳤라. 디 람진 똥바니 임바디 캡도 거래. 옛날 디 차대 나츠 모히요 말. 디션한데라 람진기 똥바랑 딱까지도 따오 제기요래. 다동이 사르체직 쉐동디 람진기 똥바제텔라 돈덕직 요래 거랑. 예니 마주비고니 거랑 예니 일룩다워직 임발라 고그래. 예니 거랑 그 주니 임바 예니 거랑 그 니룩 임바직라 고그래 마토. 다치 무보 메송한다워직 땅 직강 메송한다워직라 과요 말을 제때닝이 그냥 또 라며.
So, Śariputra asked this question, and addressed in this way, Noble Avalokiteśvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, spoke the following words to the worthy Śariputra. So now he gives a response and answer. And he says, O Śariputra, any son or daughter of noble family who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should see everything as follows. See authentically that the 5 mind-body aggregates are empty by nature. And so that is the sort of short answer. And so, children of spiritual good fortune, son or daughter of spiritual good fortune, those who have this interest in this inclination, then who wish to realize wisdom that will take us to the other side, who yearn to realize the authentic and true natural state, who are enthusiastic for that, who are devoted to that. How should they proceed? And so Avalokiteśvara says in response, then anyone who wishes to engage in the practice, which means the hearing of teachings, contemplating and meditating of those, then they of the profound perfection of wisdom should see everything as follows. That the 5 mind-body aggregates are empty by nature. And so we'll get into this. This will be sort of unpacked slowly, but basically the 5 mind-body aggregates in a nutshell are forms, sensations, perceptions, conditioning factors, and consciousness. And it's a way of categorizing all of our experience, perceiver and perceived. And so then all of this is empty by nature. By its very nature, which means timelessly, its own natural state is that. It's timelessly always been that. And so all phenomena here being described in the 5 mind-body aggregates, it means then what is perceived and then the perceiver of those. So forms, all that we perceive, and then all the different factors of the mind that is perceiving these objects. What is their actual nature, the nature of perceiver and perceived, subject and object? And so here, given through this format of what are called 5 mind-body aggregates. So on the relative way, there's the way things appear. And we see them and so forth. As ordinary beings, we perceive and experience forms, sounds, sights, tactile sensations, sense, flavors. We have our 5 sensory objects that we perceive. And then there's the perceiver of those, the visual, audio, and so forth. All of these in entirety, all of perceiver and perceived are ultimately, their ultimate nature is empty by nature. That is their natural state. So, for example, when we take our physical body, which is a form, and we look at it and we're like, we have our hands and our legs and our skin and our flesh and our bones and the marrow of our bones and all of our vascular system of blood and veins and then our internal organs and so forth. All that constitutes the material physical body is a mechanism that we call a body. To ordinary beings, there's a way that it appears to us and a way that we perceive it. And it's an object of it's a visual object, it's a sensory object, it's a tactile object, a scent object, and so forth. An object of the senses, sense consciousnesses. So there's the way it appears. But then what is its ultimate nature? What is ultimately true about the appearance of our physical body, our form? It is empty by nature. That doesn't deny the appearance relatively right now as we experience it in whatever way we perceive and experience it. Ultimately, its nature is the same. The difference is that ordinary mind and consciousness that it involves non-recognition of true nature is not seeing it from the perspective of its natural state, of its actual nature. We see the way that it appears, but we're not experiencing its actual nature. And so
풍부
our
군접 그 차도
physical
막
form,
통구요 말.
then
나랑 소수.
we are
군접 그
only
참,
perceiving its relative nature, the way it appears.
Teni teranga teni ngi zupo
So
trekeyo
then we think,
samkap
okay, I
shekeyore.
need to wash my body,
Teni
I
nga
need to brush my
salt trekap
teeth,
shekeyore. Teni nga teni
I need to
shekeyore.
floss.
These teni
And
zupo trekap
then we have so many things that we have to do to take care of this body.
군접 그
So
착치고
that's
삼목당도
all
그요.
we're ever thinking about is the relative nature of that body, how it relatively appears, and the care of that. And I'm sick, or I have a headache, and I don't feel good, my feet hurt.
It hurt my Achilles.
My Achilles tendon hurts.
Achilles.
I can't say it either.
So
we have all these thoughts about it. But all we're relating to is one aspect, the relative aspect. But then, more than that, what is its ultimate nature? We're not seeing it. That there's its actual nature. But we're not seeing it, we're not thinking about it, we're not looking at it. That needs wisdom. What sees its actual nature, its ultimate nature, is the wisdom that takes us to the other side, profound wisdom, Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya. That's what sees its actual nature. And from the perspective of that actual nature, everything, subject and object, all that we perceive as the objects of our perception, and then all the aspects that are the perceiver of those objects, are empty by nature. That is their natural state. There isn't anything that's not that. So, for example, it's like no matter where you taste honey, it's always sweet. Or wherever you taste like a cookie, it's permeated by sweetness. So whichever part of the cookie you take a bite of, it's sweet. Whatever part of the honey you taste, it's sweet. Similarly, whatever aspect of reality, be it perceiver or perceived, subject and object, in entirety is empty, is permeated by its nature. So it is empty by nature. But that aspect of it, its actual nature, is not typically what we're relating to, what we're seeing or recognizing or knowing about a thing. We're focused on the way it appears, the relative appearance of it versus its actual nature. Its actual nature is what it is by its very nature. What it is timelessly, what it always is, no matter how it appears and arises. And that doesn't mean, like emptiness, that means that now it can't be, that it's nothingness, that it has to disappear or anything. While it is appearing, it is that nature. And that is why it is by that very nature, empty by nature, even as it appears. Awesome.
Teningi karlap kyoze nandi kabla kirantu hakogowa chigla. In English, you usually say empty, and the emptiness is a little bit different. Empty means that there's many ways you can understand. But in Tibetan, we call the emptiness, means tongba need. Tong need, if you this art, need that words, and then make a different meaning. That's going to true nature. Tani inna tani ngindani kerang thola tongni zaya te shir mar tongba zaya te la mambo ko sa yores.
Yeah, that's all.
Te so kanyang main pa chik nguzeng ku yore. Kare re zena na tani yud mamnyong pi tongni chik yore nga su jikten kamdala yud mamnyong wa ka me pa zaya chik yore nga su tongni zena tongba zaya chik yore. Yud mamnyong wi tongba zaya chik yore. Ta kare re zena na nga su po pe funny re nga su kare ze kore na rural la fuh tani yod nyungo ma se me pa rural ki fuh nam ki me tok nam ka tomba la me tok mere yeni teni rung ras nga su teni me pa mambo funny mambo ndenya yore teni korang teso inna tani jikten kam yod mam nyore teni yang jikten kam la yod ni me sui me pare when a dano so de nga chu jikten di nang la yo mar ze ndo wa ti tando te when a yod ni tawo yo re teni me soni te me pa chik yore ndi toni ze te technica la ko yo mare ye ni yod mam nyong wa chi la yang ko yo mare ko me pa me chang chik teni yod na yang jima chi la chik me soni tem when nga chu re teni me tok chik me per su sona ta yang ken chik tan kham la yo marwa teni te ta teni tawo yod ni me tok chik yod ni jima me sore teni na jig ni me sore teni when na kambi na to mi tong ba da yang me pare tong ba re mo yo mare se kambi na yang a tu kang ba tong ba re se nothingness ke chik yore
Empty, we call it there.
empty
Empty house.
ndi me pa ze te so kang yang ko na de ke yo mare phombo nga chuni ze te yin nang da sem ki chuni ji pa te teni ndir ta bu me pa te son da wo re sam na na nor khu yo re te ko yo mare teni sa shit kale nga su shi gong na de ge ti she na ram jin ki tong ba ji pi tsik te ting wala jar gong yo re ram jin ki tong ba se chik ti ji la jar gong yo re
That's all.
o teni res
So when we look at the terms, as Rinpoche explained, oftentimes we'll say emptiness and they add a reflexive syllable to sort of make it differentiate it from empty. But in general, the term empty itself has many different kind of connotations and context, and typically means the absence of something or of nothing, leaning towards non-existence. The verb of the non-existence, like it's something that doesn't exist or isn't there or is nothingness. And so this empty needs to be differentiated in understanding from those kinds of empty that are the absence of or the non-existence of something. Should not be mixed with that. And so, for example, there's the non-existence of something, like if something has never existed in the universe, then it doesn't exist. And we might say it's empty of existing. So, for example, in Tibetan, we have lots of funny examples that we've come up with, like something that isn't the case. So, like we'll say the hair on a turtle, or a flower in the sky, or the horns of a rabbit. And we're talking about we're giving examples of something that doesn't exist and thereby is non-existent because it has never appeared or does not appear. So that would be like the emptiness of non-existence of something that's never happened. Or then there's the emptiness, or there's like the idea of non-existence in the sense of that it previously existed, but it's no longer in extent. So for example, dinosaurs. People say that dinosaurs are no longer living. So if that's the case, then they were previously present and now they don't exist. And so that's another form of non-existence, and emptiness is not that either. And so we should not misinterpret the word empty or emptiness in this context to either mean that something absolutely doesn't exist in the universe in the first place, has never existed, nor should we think that it's something that previously existed and now doesn't exist. Like it was previously present and now it's collapsed or disappeared. The flower died and it's no longer here. It'll never be retrieved again. Not that either. And then there's the empty in the sense of like the absence of something. Like we can say when there's no people in the house, we say it's an empty house. Or when something isn't inside of something else, we'll say it's empty. It doesn't have that in it. Not that empty either. So when we look at the actual nature of the 5 mind-body aggregates as the sort of enumeration, a way of explaining our universe in terms of perceiver and perceived. The 5 mind-body aggregates, all the objects that we perceive and the perceiving mind that experiences them, then it is a mistake to think that when we say they are empty, that means that they are any of those forms of non-existence that I just enumerated. And that is why the term very specifically says empty by nature. Because it's not saying it doesn't exist in any of those ways. And we will get into this as we continue to explore in this teaching. But there is a key element to that expression and the reason why it's used and worded in such a way here. Also?
다 가르쳐 교리에서 나는 히럽라 지스트는 죽비 출시야 교로와. 히럽라 지스트는 죽비 출제는 아주 히럽도 가립시니 아주 줄라께 답지 ngu부 니룩 똑비 히럽지 줄라께고나 가립시고 그래서 다더니 그 따와지 줄라께고나 가래고 그래서니 코나바니기 들어왔던 틀림시니 가리우더니 람진기 동파량 딱바지서 따오제니 람진기 동파량 딱바라 똑고 그래 제키어레 다땡 아주 투비고니 즉 섭용쉿 데니 측대초 섭용쉿 데니 삼비고니 때라 삼로땅 샤파땅 짐선 가렌둑 차상따 디고니 땅 삼비 히럽땅 데니 냠용 냠는 시발랍 데니 강삼실라 냠용고 열라께 용 냠용고 똑용고 요래 디브셔나네 데니 오테타르도 시나 딱 히럽도 열라께 고요래 히럽들이 잠모치 열라께 셰파테 가레고 코르즈나 유르추기 리앙제야데 추리앙제야데 다마 다트제야데 참참라 we call the dharma kaya 동바 닛 대초 인고래 대초더니 추담기 추니트에서 히럽 그디 대하거나 되니 히럽 열라께 용그래스 강 통화를 샤위 리응도 하고 그래 통화를 샤위 유르때 하고 그래 히럽기 더 하마거나 대톡비 히럽 영도 바직정 열라께 요 말을 대타우 다르마 다트제테 땅 다르마 가야제테 땅 람진기 똥바제테 소 직착해요래 디브셔나 아주 사강나 말고 컴바이나라 메메피 똥바테 다르마 가야 말와 롱고라 라메파테 다르마 가야 말와 다노소 메츠와테 다르마 가야 말와 오야 다르마 가제타 하창 그 잠모토 더 추탐기 추니티엠바 추탐기 니룩엠바 이영탁비 돈탐비 뎀바임바직 하고고 그요레티 똥니테 땅 아주 돈돈예샤 뜻똑고 그요레 더 치르터 똑수르 간nep시니 똑고레제나 샤네즈 근데니 딱 송용 그요레 포옹아오람지 돈나타고 지스 따고 그레스 오나 때 간nep시니 따고레제나 니 올랍샤디 그래 어디리레스
So now we're looking at how does wisdom, the Prajñāpāramitāhṛdaya, this profound wisdom that brings us to the other side, how does this wisdom, how do we generate this wisdom? How do we give rise to and train in this wisdom? And so the question posed by Śariputra to Avalokiteśvara, and then in response, Avalokiteśvara says, by realizing the true nature of phenomena. That's how we cultivate that. By realizing then the true nature of phenomena to be empty by nature. And we go through that process. The practice of that, to realize that, is threefold. We hear teachings. That's what often is translated as study, which is where we hear the words and their meaning and the terms, and we have a comprehension of that. And then following that is the internal process of contemplation, in which we examine that meaning. We take the lines of reasoning and process it through to come to that understanding, and then we understand it through contemplation. We understand the logic or reasoning of it. And then we implement that into our experience. That's called practice or meditation, so that eventually we realize it to be the case through our direct experience of it. And so that's how we cultivate wisdom. And what we're cultivating wisdom of is of the most profound nature here. We're generating in our mind a profound insight of the actual or absolute nature of reality, of perceiver and perceived. So we could say if the object of wisdom, what is realized by wisdom, is the ultimate nature, and there are words for that. For example, dharma dhatu, which could be translated as the basic space of phenomena. That's one term that's used. Or dharmakaya, another term, you could translate that as something like absolute dimension. Or emptiness. Or dharmata, the true nature of the phenomena. And so essentially all of these are the true nature of phenomena. They're terms that are used to describe it. So that's what wisdom knows, the empty nature of phenomena. How it's empty by nature. It's dharma dhatu, it's the basic space of phenomena. That's its nature. Or it's dharmakaya, that's its nature. These are Sanskrit terms that are describing that ultimate nature. And that's what wisdom realizes. We could say dharma dhatu, the basic space of phenomena. We could say dharmakaya, the absolute dimension. We could say empty by nature. And all of those is saying the same thing, and we are not speaking about an empty house. Not that kind of non-existence. That's not dharmakaya. We are not speaking about the horns of a rabbit. That's not dharmakaya. We are not speaking about a dinosaur, the non-existence of dinosaurs. That's not dharmakaya. We are speaking about the very nature of what is appearing in this moment by its nature, the natural state of all phenomena. Their ultimate nature, just as it is. And so anyone who wishes to realize that, to pursue the realization of that, what do they need to do? They need to cultivate the view, where is it? To see that the five mind-body aggregates are empty by nature. And so then that's the way in which we realize this. Avalokiteśvara says that's how we generate wisdom. And then from there, he goes on to explain how we see all of phenomena to be empty by nature. Mm-hmm. And that's the teaching that's coming.
Yeah, tani ta nga so trawa chik tu chot. Deni ma sangye nizuk tongba tongwa nizuk so jipani.
So tomorrow we will get into the actual teaching of what it is, which begins with form is emptiness and emptiness is form and continues from there. That's where we'll start the teachings tomorrow, which is basically the definition of profound wisdom. So today we're looking at how do we practice profound wisdom. Then tomorrow we're going to look at what is profound wisdom. Does it realize? Does it know? So maybe there are some questions for people here in the room. And then I will be repeating them. So try to make it very clear and succinct. Julie?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you. Yeah. Yeah, that's the way to practice. So the question was, when we spoke about the way to practice as being hearing, contemplating, and meditating, could Rinpoche clarify the difference between hearing, or contemplating and meditating.
Contemplating, meditating. Yes, I will. So the karere zenana deni koran rugby goni shat pap shek yo patean shirtang shat gum rawo chik zena dik dik yo shirtang gum kama tak yo shat gum yak pop shina nyumon pa rag pa ngonun ro fang ro la pantok yo yena deni tak so shat pap shek yo sem yo pap shek yo hago songa deni gumba zete 대 말에 지그니 단 항통 존도 죽비 고니 지그니 기 톡니 항통 람 냠식시니 공도 샤니즈 냠식시 송아 디 갑랍 샤니즈 그 샤파 땅게요 말에 다니 옛나양 다니 마투 디 갑라 가레 샤고레제나 곰제테 똥니 람 냠식시 고요 지그니 단 비 톡니 호요와 메파 강참 강탑 띵어라 니고요
So
띠마가
shetar jela shigyu be kabla negative. No gom
아니
kabla.
카카레 라비
Oh.
샤 금코랑 참삼락 샷바
No,
코랑 양
no.
금
Ni shading bo shesa she, not chatting bo, not tao paita chata chet. Like tongni yen she be kabla, shading bo shesa she be kabla ngang la jogyo. So samlo tongni figure it out chege me be kabla. But wrong la nge
I
payo.
don't understand what
Wrong la nge
her
payo you be
question. Mi
kabla.
teni chu ko masong.
Gom
Shapa dang chu teni ko kyabar kare la masong e chu.
the
Samba dang
so
gombani.
samba the
Samba gombani
yes,
kyabar kare la
takching
song.
chebe kabla gyms and namtok. But then gom kabla di kabla sherab yore nge she yo nge pa
Yor
yore.
yor yang yor.
That's what I'm asking.
Jirni dang hang dong zong juk re.
Yeah.
De kal yang lab yo.
So I'll speak more about this, but basically contemplation, which is also meditation, it is a practice. So we often say contemplative meditation, or another translation for the same exact term in Tibetan is analytical meditation. It means we're using our concepts of logic and reasoning to investigate something to arrive at a certainty. And so our mind is moving, we're thinking about it. So that's contemplative meditation or contemplation. So we're thinking about the meaning using the lines and reasoning, and it can help to reduce our disturbing emotions and thought process to some extent. And so it's gaining certainty through using our mental capacities. Meditation is when you have the unity of calm abiding, one-pointed focus, and that profound insight. So you have a certainty of the true nature and you're resting in that, and it's not using your conceptual mind to figure it out. You already have the certainty. And so it's the unity of shamatha and vipassana, calm abiding and profound insight. And Rinpoche said we will go into that in more detail as we kind of go through these teachings. But that's the basic difference.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to say that. We translate. The question was talking about dependent origination versus interdependence, and I tried to make it clear that it's the same term in the Tibetan, but sometimes in context in English, different sentences just come together better, but they're the same term and they mean the same thing. Okay, the question is, can you speak about the difference between dependent origination and karma?
Yeah. Teni ta karma yang li temdr kubdu re. Temdr ki mabdu wi karma yo mare. Karma zete nga chu shirtang ka gewa tang mergewa. Kari yenna chik sakni zakchi ki gewa tang mergewa kang rongwa chik sakni. Teni to sem ki tokla wakchik vishik songwa ti mangla karma ze ki yore. Yenna te sakpa te yang temdr la ragli yore ma toko mo karma sakya yang yo mare. Teni yang ten kongji ki pa te nga chu teni sem ka sa jang rikpa kongji nam ki ka tokla karma wakchik te vishik yore. Ti shirna ne teni tere teni maung pa na ti li telap teni ne karma telap teni ti mrivu maung pa dewa tang dungar kanong chik jong kare. Shirtang deduk yo tsat tham cheter ngung ka karmi wang tab shikaya yo mare. Khwe na tsen di tokla yang rang ka tanda ta kerang ka poison chik zab shikna kyo na kare. 옛날 리기고니 중이부터 자고잉이 봐요 말대. 좀 차르크 깽고 그래. 옛날야 나츠더니 대화 동안 마음보치 ngâm kéo ngâm lý tông để vào rồi, giờ tông kiến sen đi thọc làm để vào rồi, tông kéo ngâm cái thọc làm để vào rồi. Thế thì cái giờ kiến mahampochi là tên ní, thế thì karma là tên ní, lý thế là tên ní, sang ngã chú 대화 tông 동안 xong khơi opate, lý thế mena, tiếp 대화 tông 동안 멈춰 vào. Tiếp xem nào để được tham chế lý cái gì xung quanh khơi opate, nào bị tệ. तर temde ze ten jam re jong wi goni तर nang khiore ze tere khwe na nga chu shiror ku ngu bo tham che ding teri rwa ze khang nak chal tham che me to ko ke chal tham che o tham che ni tham che te khona ra na so su gyu ta ken la ten ni shong khiore nga chu dewa ta dung re ze te gyu ta ken la mar ten ni ta ga chi gyong wa chi kang yo mar chen di gyu ken la ten ona da 영나 그 karmi gyurkenla tenonanda tendi finim deratup yores.
Dependent origination is the mechanism of karma. So karma would actually be categorized as dependent origination. So karma means action. And it has the implicit sense of an action, whether it be positive or negative. We call these defiling actions, actions that cause us to produce samsara, that those actions are then causes that produce future results. So we engage in an action, and then we are imprinting our mental consciousness with a habit, a habitual imprint. And then we're accumulating habitual imprints in dependence upon and in relation to which is the word dependent origination, later we have a resultant experience of that. It manifests as our experience. And so we have the ground of all ordinary experience, our mind that is conscious and aware. And then we engage in actions, and the word action is karma, which is then we're imprinting our mind with habitual imprints. And then eventually in the future, when the conditions, the dependence at that time comes together for those to ripen, then we have experiences of happiness or suffering. And so then all happiness, in general, we speak about happiness and suffering being the result of previous actions, but sometimes it's not totally karmic in the sense of it's the literal result of actions that have to ripen in that way from previous lifetimes, because we also have to take into account the causes and conditions of what we're doing right now. So take, for example, if you eat poison, something that's poisonous, and you get sick, that's the effect of the poison, not the karmic result of the poison. So you can experience the effect of causes and conditions right now. That you ate the poison or got sick over the poison might not be like 100% karmic, like it has to be the result of previous actions. It could be the mistake of having eaten it right now. The karma didn't necessitate that you eat the poison. So you have like causes and conditions from previous lifetimes, which we call karmic, those habitual imprints, but you also have the causes and conditions of right now, but all of that is dependently originating, is interdependence, the tendril. So then they're related, and kind of like karma is dependent origination. It's like an aspect of it in that, from this perspective. And so we take into account the causes and conditions of previous lifetimes, but we also take into the account the causes and conditions of right now and the effect of the immediate conditions, which isn't necessarily 100% karmic. But it is dependently occurring. It is dependent origination in either case and both cases. And so then the experience of like either pleasure or pain didn't come about from no causes, and it didn't come about from something that doesn't cause it, from a cause for something else. Like it's not its cause. Does that make sense?
No.
Human means
no.
So for example, you couldn't have a cause for one thing cause something else. Like this thing is not the result of that thing.
Your cause.
It can't come from that cause. So it can't come from no cause, and it can't
거고요.
come from a cause that is not its cause. There. I said it. So those are two things that are always the case with whatever we experience. They're always dependently occurring. But one cause cannot also create everything. That's another aspect of that. So in this way, everything that occurs and all of our experiences are dependent upon the causes and conditions. And that's called dependent origination. And that is the same. So that's the mechanism in which we experience happiness and suffering. And some of it is literally karmic, and some of it is more conditional in this life, and it depends. But it's both dependently occurring. And that is the same as a mechanism or operating system for the entire universe. Like nothing occurs without being dependent upon its causes and conditions. The trees, the flowers, the natural environment, everything is dependently occurring. So too, all of our experiences, our happiness and our suffering are dependently occurring in dependence upon their causes and conditions. That's why we want to think about what causes and conditions are we accumulating. Because and then also that we've previously accumulated that's ripening in this life. And then what are we accumulating in this life that's going to then affect us in the future? What causes and conditions are we producing for future results? So that's what I was saying earlier when I said the wisdom of relative reality. That's this right here that understands that mechanism of cause and result. And we study how are things dependently occurring? What produces what? And the wisdom begins to discern that. And then we know what do we want to do and not do. What's our path? And that wisdom prevents us from going on a path that's going to produce unwanted experiences and going on the path that's going to, result in what we want or wish for. And so then that is the connection between the two.
These days, we really, even Buddhist people, they are not follow the wisdom, real wisdom. Because there is some things, sometimes their feelings are good and they follow the feelings. It just seems like they just enjoying any retreat for the feelings.
We're going to retreats because of how it feels.
It's pretty amazing.
And that's a sign that we really don't have wisdom. This understanding, the kind of topic of what it is that we want to adopt and practice and what it is that we want to refrain from. Because this wisdom is necessary if we want to experience peace and well-being. Which is what we want, right? So we need to know how do we produce that. So that's where we're going to stop the teachings for today.
Then many people, maybe some people good night or some people good morning in this world. As independent is different. So thank you.
And then, I'll do it after dedication.
Okay.
There's when I was looking for materials in my computer yesterday, I had made a topical outline for the Heart Sutra, and it has all the lists and categories, and it'll just make it a lot easier for you to follow the teachings. And so since we now have this learning management system on our website and everybody is registered, if you sign in and go into your learning box for the Heart Sutra, this is there for you. And it will be very helpful, so I want to encourage everyone to use that. We just put it in today or yesterday, so it's new. Okay, now we can.
It's okay.
Dedicate the marriage.
Kewa kondo yang da lama dan dharme chunji parla longcho chang satan lam yontan rabzo ne dorje jangke komba nyor to sho. Thank you.
Chö